For a whole month, I managed to write at least 500 words every day straight. And this is something you can do too. But I get it. Even if a part of us just wants to go and do the thing already, a lot of things stop us. Maybe we're just not good enough. Or maybe we shouldn't do what we want. There's a lot of expectations to live up to. But that doesn't have to be the end. Instead, you should run with your motivation and use these 8 tips that I use to write every day. Tip number 1, ignore expectations. If you're barely trying to get into writing and you're still deciding what to write, you should write what you want instead of what you should write. Oftentimes, there's a lot of expectations when it comes to writing. Some people say you have to write an epic literary masterpiece with a detailed plot, and oh, don't forget those rich themes. But what if that's not what you want? The truth is, you shouldn't let what other people think stop you if that's what really brings you joy. Writing something that you don't care about is gonna kill your motivation. Tip number 2 is to write what you want first. One piece of advice that I've heard is to write scenes and chapters that you want to write first. That includes a cool fight scene you are looking forward to, a bonding moment, or even the ending. This works great because let's just say you're feeling absolutely stuck on a certain scene. You can just jump ahead and work on something else to get you into the flow. And the best part is, that flow can actually get you to finish what you were working on earlier. The progress makes progress. Tip number 3 is, I don't want to write a short story. As the tip says, I don't want to write a short story. A lot of people say that you should write short stories if you want to write a novel, and in theory and hypothetically, it is sound. By doing that, you can write well-paced, self-contained things that are polished and complete. And then after that, you can try to refine it, maybe even submit it to some writing contests. But to me, writing a short story just means purposely avoiding the thing I actually want to write, which is a full-length novel. So what I'm trying to say is, don't feel pressured to write something like a short story if you don't want to. You can practice while writing a novel. And that goes for the rest of these tips and advice. If it doesn't resonate with you, then you don't have to take it. Tip number 4 is the 50% rule. One rule I've heard as an artist and took to heart applies really well to building a writing habit, and it's called the 50% rule. This rule means that you must spend at most 50% of your time on technical skills and at least 50% experimenting, playing around, and just drawing for the sake of it. The purpose of this rule is to create a balance between work and play, which is essential to building a daily habit. And the origin behind it comes from the fact that oftentimes people optimize the fun out of drawing. Maybe it's because it's satisfying to learn, or maybe because they feel the need to rush, but this can drain and discourage them. And so because of that, this rule is meant to counter that mindset and maintain the spirit of art. I would say that this 50% rule applies to writing in the same way. It'll help you see value in just writing and having fun with it. It's also a super motivating rule because you know your experience when you start writing is not just going to be you focusing on boring bleh stuff all the time. Something else I'd like to mention is by focusing on the fun stuff, you'll actually be encouraged to do the technical stuff afterwards. Because eventually you'll be so invested in the hobby that you'll actually want to improve. And this actually happened to me, and I ended up buying 3 or so writing books, with one being an editing book called Self-Editing for Fiction Writers. Tip number 5 is to write a shitty first draft. In my first writing class in college, what they taught us was to write shitty first drafts. And yes, we literally titled our drafts shitty first drafts. Anyway, we read from this article from a book called Bird by Bird. This article boils down that essentially every writer, or nearly all writers, write terrible first drafts. And that writing a shitty first draft is actually not a bad thing, but instead just part of the process of getting to the good second drafts and terrific third drafts. The article talks about how the point of the first draft is essentially to let the child in you out and allow it to be silly and crazy and weird and just say whatever it wants. And then after that, you can sort of look through your draft and see what you can salvage and fix up. This is great because it gets you to loosen up and lower the pressure to actually write something good. And then instead of starting with a dreaded blank page, you can just actually work with something. Tip number 6, failure is inevitable. To be honest, I've gotten to the point in my life where failure is inevitable and common. I take L's every day. That sounds so sad, but I don't know. So for me, I've just kind of come to accept it as part of the learning process. I've got a very growth mindset where instead of focusing on the, oh no, I'm not talented, I can't grow, I can't do this, I'm just more used to things being an opportunity. Because of that, I personally am not a big fan of when people are like, I'm not talented, and And honestly, it makes me a little sad, because when I look at myself and everything I've done, none of it took talent. Like, when it comes to art, some people are like, you're talented, you're so good, I can't do art like you, and I could only draw a stick figure. But in reality, you don't need talent at all. You can get good at most creative stuff like art with a good roadmap, feedback, and hard work. And let's say, hypothetically, worst case scenario, you end up making crappy stuff. Let's look at the bright side. People love crappy stuff. There's a reason why everybody likes generic isekai slop garbage and trashy TV shows. And also, if you're unlucky and you are untalented, it'll make the progress so much more meaningful. I know I felt that way when it comes to the thing I'm least talented at, which is FPS games. It took me like 2 years and 1,000 hours to get to my peak rank of platinum. Platinum! 1,000 hours! 1,000! But I got to platinum, so Okay, what I'm trying to say is failure is inevitable and it's not really a bad thing. Tip number 7 is to set up realistic and measurable goals. One thing I did day 1 was set up realistic, achievable, and measurable goals. Now that I say it, it sounds like something I'd read in one of my BS business textbooks. They always have these 3-word acronyms that randomly summarize stuff. Well, don't worry, this isn't a BS acronym. So when it comes down to it, my own benchmark for my own goals was to write 500 words minimum a day. If I wanted to write more, that's great. It worked pretty well. 500 words is something I could knock out in like an hour or so, and it wasn't too much to where it felt super difficult, and also not too little where I felt like I did nothing. It was also like super easy to be like, well, I could go over 500 words, and that raised my confidence. But this count did come with a little flaw, and this flaw was that sometimes I'd look at the word count and be like, well, I've got enough words, I can stop now. And it would interrupt the flow I had, because then I'd get to the word count and then I'd stop even if I could have kept going. But honestly, it's okay, because at the same time, it allows for a sort of balance and a sort of way to be like, hey, you did enough work today. You did a good job. You can stop now. Which is great, because I'm prone to overworking myself, and also on days when I was just too busy, I could still do the bare minimum and feel accomplished. And one more thing about keeping track of a word count, the best part of it is that you can actually see your progress slowly but surely add up. Every time I got to another 1,000, I'd be like, I'd like rub my little hands together and laugh. It was like really satisfying. I also recommend using NaNoWriMo to keep track of your projects. I discovered this after the challenge, but it is so neat. There's like a little graph and stuff. And I mean, you could just use like Google Sheets and stuff and then just make your own graph. But this thing looks cool and you can share it with your friends. And also, I'm not sponsored, it just looks neat. NaNoWriMo, yeah. Tip number 8, consider fanfiction. Something that I heavily recommend if you're writing as a passion project is to write fanfiction. And the reason why is because truthfully, I actually worked on a fanfiction during this challenge for many reasons which can apply to you. The main one is that your love of a show or a movie or a book can actually serve as really strong motivation because you're already attached and have experience with these characters. So if you want to hear more about why you should write a fanfiction, feel free to watch my video on the same topic. See you on the next one.